I had originally started, when I was building this one, it had so many slides I had to break it into two parts, and so next week you'll get Noise Pursuits Part 2. This is Noise Pursuits Part 1, and some of this stuff is not what you would expect. I had written an article for Motor Rage several years ago that it was one of these things where they called me and said, hey, the lady that was doing the magazine said the guy that was going to do the Noise Pursuits article bailed on us, and can you have something for us by next Tuesday? And this was like Friday afternoon. So I had to put some stuff together real quick, but some of this comes from there, some of it comes from the shop, this kind of thing. So let's jump into this thing. Anywhere you got motion, you're typically going to have noise, and if things are touching each other, you're going to have noise too. These hard AC lines that are in contact with the shock tower on this Mustang was causing a noise, and that was something that I got, they handed me. I didn't do a whole lot of noise hunting most of the time when I was at the dealership. This was a dealership job right here, but sometimes you see they even, on this one, they even put a little insulator to try to prevent that, but this thing still managed to touch the shock tower, and it was bumping and rattling and stuff. Now, noise cancellation technology is used in hybrids. Craig Van Battenberg was talking about a hybrid that was making a noise that he worked on for a while, and then he was saying that he found out that it had blown the radio fuse, and that was the only problem with it, because the radio has got noise cancellation technology on a lot of these hybrids because they have natural noises that you want to cover up with noise cancellation. Now, I've never even been clear about how noise cancellation works, but I know it works really well. You know, got to do with frequencies and all that kind of thing, which, you know, if you're into that sort of stuff, you can probably explain that better than I can. These plastic resonators, these chambers, you've seen these on exhaust systems, you'll see them shaped all kinds of different ways, are made to keep it from making that hoot noise when you take off. Ooh, you know, not all vehicles have one. My Jeep Cherokee didn't have one, but a lot of vehicles will have these resonance chambers that, like I say, they just seem to have to be there for no reason. But you got to remember, anytime a car maker is making 1 million cars, if they spent $10 or $5 on one of these, they spent, let's say, $5, they spent $5 million putting this on 1 million cars, and there's a reason it's there. So you need to be paying attention to that. But that's why those things are there. It's also a leak point. If anything burns a hole in it, it can cause unmetered air to get past the mass airflow sensor, because it's actually part of the intake stream. Well, we used to turn the breathers upside down, you know, to take the breather top off and turn it upside down so we could hear that noise back in the 70s, because it would make that racket. You know, anybody that's got one of these kind of breathers, you know, they can have fun with that. Now, some drivers are bothered by even the smallest noise, and some won't notice noises that might bother you, but they'll focus on noises that only matter to them. They might ignore other noises and say, I don't like this noise, and you're hearing noise all over the place. Well, they're focusing on one particular noise. Now, some people ignore all sorts of noises because their vehicles are falling apart anyway. And, you know, unless the engine's knocking or something, or the wheel's about to come off, they're not paying any attention to it. Some people will just keep driving when they hear a noise without even wondering what it is. You know, you see these videos online where the tire just comes off the car, or somebody's driving on a vehicle that's been on a flat and they're grinding the rim away. I mean, it's amazing to me how some people, even when the car doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right, they just keep on driving it. But some people are really notice every little sound, and some of that stuff can be really annoying to chase, you know. Make sure, though, you're working on what they're talking about. Now, this is really important, and if you just go in there and drive it and say, oh, well, I hear that noise, and you work on it for an hour and a half getting that noise straightened out, and then they bring it right back and say, this is still not fixed, and you go drive it with them, and they weren't even paying any attention to that noise that you found and you fixed, that you heard. They heard something that was different. But you charged them an hour and a half or 2 hours labor to fix this thing they weren't even complaining about. So the wise thing to do is to get in the vehicle with the customer, drive it with them, ride in it with them, let them drive, and say, show me which noise you're talking about. That way you don't get trapped into fixing something that they didn't care if it was fixed or not. And some customers will be really annoying and say, well, I'm not paying you to fix that because I wasn't complaining about that, even though you didn't know, you know. So you got to make sure you zero in on the right noise instead of piddling around and wasting your time. I found that out the hard way. I do this ticket on a Mustang. It was written up as a buzzing noise coming from the instrument cluster at any speed over 40 miles an hour. And I said, well, this is interesting. You know, they gave it to me because it was an instrument cluster thing, and I worked on instrument clusters, and sometimes I'd take speedometers apart and fix them, you know, whenever the, you know, put a little oil in the right place whenever the needle was bouncing all over the place and they were making racket. So the dispatcher hands it to me because it's written up as a speedometer noise, because that's what the guy thinks it is. It sounds to him like it's coming right from the speedometer area. Well, I held a large cloth up while we were driving. Me and a shop foreman drove it together, and you could hold this cloth up, and when you got it over in the top of the windshield in there behind the, you know, the sun visor was folded up out of the way, it would be, you wouldn't hear it anymore. If you were holding a jacket that we found in the car up in front of, right in there, you can move it around, and right in that one spot on the windshield, you didn't hear the noise anymore. Even when it was driving, and even when you were hearing it, you know, we could hear the buzz he was talking about. It was easy to hear. It was the 1996 Mustang is what it was. Well, we put masking tape around the trim, because sometimes you do that in case the trim's bouncing in the wind. Didn't change anything. And he had an appointment he needed to go to somewhere else, so he needed to leave and bring the car back later. He said he'd bring it back and let us finish working on it later on. And we let him go. You know, we didn't charge him anything for what we did because we really didn't fix anything, you know, and he needed to leave. And he was a nice guy, so he wasn't being a jerk or anything like that. Well, he was a retired fighter pilot. I found out when I was talking to him. He flew these F-100 Sabre jets. And I told him it was like the trim was buzzing around the top of the windshield, or something was going on there, or maybe the headliner was bouncing, or I don't know, I wasn't sure. But this guy drove he told me, he came back and he says, I found out what my problem was. So he drove the car with his elbow sitting on the door panel, and notice he had his hand up here, and when he was hearing that buzz, he was feeling it on his hand. And so what he did was, he pointed his finger, he started his finger pointing up, and he pointed it forward, and when he got it pointed at the tip of that bug shield, he actually felt that buzz on the tip of his finger. See, this guy was thinking about airflow because he was a retired fighter pilot. So he stopped without moving his finger, got out and looked down his finger, and it was pointing right at this. And it was sort of one of those kind, it was held up off the hood a little bit, you know. I mean, that was the way it was, and it had these little curves. You know, some people have those curved up bug shields that are supposed to make this wind shear that keeps any bugs from hitting the glass at all, even if they miss the bug shield. And a lot of the times that'll cause it to, the windshield washers not to work right, because when they're driving down the road to try to wash their windshield, that low pressure that's created by that bug shield will cause the water from the windshield washer squirters to go over the top of the car. But when you park the car and stop, they spray right on the glass. Anyway, this thing was buzzing. That's what it amounted to. And he actually built these little aluminum strips that he had. He bent some that perfectly matched it and put them with Velcro so that that thing wouldn't vibrate, and took care of his own noise. So, you know, we didn't really charge him anything, like I say, because we didn't fix anything. Well, that was one of those interesting little noise things. That was something that he figured out on his own. But like I say, because of the fact that he had flown aircraft and stuff, and he thought a lot about, you know, wind and airflow and all that. He initially, though, was tripped up because he thought it was coming from the speedometer. Now, you got an originator, a conductor, and a reactor. I just use brakes for an example of this. And what goes on there is the squeal that begins when the brakes are applied. There's your originator. These pads go against the rotor vibrates, it conducts through the hub, which has got a bearing into the knuckle. The knuckle begins to vibrate, and other parts too, but the part you're going to hear typically is going to be this plate, which is almost like a diaphragm. Now the reason that some brakes squeal and some don't is because they don't always find that sweet spot resonant frequency that it takes to make that noise where it's audible. But they also put shims on the back of the brake pads, and there's this is not just about brakes, but I was talking basically, I use this for a you know, the shims on the back of the brake pads or that compound you put on there sort of prevents that vibration from making its way into that caliper and so on and so forth. Because, you know, the caliper is bolted to the knuckle. There's the tube right here is where the caliper bolts to the knuckle. And so since the caliper vibrates, a lot of the times it goes straight from the caliper to the knuckle, or it can go through here. One way or another, it makes it to your ear, and that annoys people. Of course, some people will drive with squealing brakes and just ignore that. And sometimes the brake pads are the problem. Never mind that. Originator, conductor, and reactor. Remember that. And that's not just talking about brakes. Any kind of noise you've got, noise/vibration, is going to have an originator, a conductor, and a reactor. So there's vibrations you can see. The reactor is the most noticeably affected component. If you see the sun visor bouncing a little bit, or the seat, believe it or not, if you can measure the frequency of that bounce and do some math, and you know what the you know, the engine speed, how fast each one of the components is turning, how fast the wheels are rolling, and you can figure out those frequencies, you can actually measure the vibration, do some math, and figure out where this is probably coming from. I went to a class where we had to do this. He would put vibrations in there by putting extra bolts on the torque converter, one of the torque converter bolts, you know, so that it was, or on the balancer or whatever in the front, so that it would vibrate. And we would have to take the electronic vehicle analyzer that he had, and it's got a little corded component that you can put on the sun visor, put on the seat, and while you're feeling this vibration, you're going to read those frequencies and record them. And then if you know how fast the engine's spinning, how fast each pulley's spinning, do the math on each one of those. You got to know the diameter of the pulleys. It's kind of annoying, but the long and the short of it is you can figure out exhaust vibrations. You can figure out too that way. But you know, a lot of times we just look around and see what we can see. But they put these vibration dampers on exhaust systems and stuff to change that. Some brake calipers, I don't know if you've noticed it or not, some brake calipers will have a little weight sticking off of it up there that doesn't look like it's there for any reason at all. That changes the resonance of that caliper so that it doesn't create a squealing noise when you apply the brakes. And that's when you got one that's kind of designed into the system. This is a cerometer. This is a pretty cool little thing. If you get one of these, they cost about 70 bucks if you buy the Tecumseh OEM special tool for small engines, but you can get one of these things and you can put it on whatever surface is vibrating, and you turn that knob until this thing does its most vibrating. You know, you're matching the resonant frequency by the length of this wire that's coming out of here. It's coiled in here, and you can read these dials here and tell what the resonant frequency is, which is pretty doggone interesting to do. That particular way doesn't cost much, but it doesn't work in every case. It's hard to do that on a seat or a sun visor, but you can do it on the top of an engine, you know. There's phone apps available, though, that the phone automatically senses vibration just because it's got those sensors, you know, the way the cell phones are made. Okay, so you got first, second, or third order vibration. You can find all kinds of, this one here costs about $100. For this NVH for Android. It's also available for iPhone. Vibration diagnosis, you know, you can look vibratesoftware.inc. Look that up. You can buy this for 100 bucks. There was another one they used to sell that somebody had. It was like $400, and it was so good at, you know, put whatever vehicle you got in there and the speed you're traveling, all that kind of thing. It would just give you all kinds of information about what was probably causing the vibration. But now this one right here, I'm going to show you this thing right here, because I've got this thing right here on an old cell phone that I don't carry anymore. I'm going to show you how it works. But I'm in a minute. But first we're going to talk about this. If you got a specific frequency for a vibration recorded at a specific vehicle speed or engine speed, the next step, mostly vehicle speed is what this is for. The next step is to calculate the frequency of the rotating components at that vehicle or engine speed. But if it's the vehicle speed you're talking about, you can get a tire size calculator and you can figure out how many revolutions per mile, or you can measure the circumference of the tire by putting tape on the floor, roll it, and putting tape on the tire, then roll it until it does a full turn, and then measure between the two pieces of tape, and then divide that into 5,280 feet, and then you're going to find out how many times per mile this thing rolls, and then you're going to know how many times per second it rolls, and I'll show you a little bit more about that right there. This tire size calculator is really, really handy. You can copy that address and go find that. But this one here, for example, I went to this thing and I put in a Toyota 2020 Corolla LE, and it told me the tires that were supposed to be on it. Now you got to make sure it's got the tires it was designed, it came with. It'll tell you how many revs per mile they are. See, you convert that to revolutions per minute by using the formula. A first order vibration means there's only one bump on the tire. A second order vibration will mean there's two bumps on the tires, and so on, right? Well, if you got a first order vibration frequency at 60 miles an hour of 13.52 hertz that you've measured with your equipment, and then you're looking, you got to make sure you're going the right speed and all that. If that matches the frequency that these tires of, the rotational of the tires, hertz is, per second, vibrations per second. Second order vibration will be 27 hertz, because you're going to be hitting two bumps per, Anyway, you can see what I'm talking about there, and it can be because the tire's out of balance or whatever, but typically that'll be a first order vibration most of the time, not always. Anyway, that may be a little too rich for your blood if it's early in the morning, you hadn't had your coffee. But there's professional tools out there that you can get that are only focused on finding vibrations and noises. And see, the screen that you pull up will give you all kinds of information, and it'll give you an idea about where the problem probably is based on the inputs that it has. There's also this electronic vehicle analyzer. I used one of those at the school. You can buy one of these pretty cheap, couple $100 on eBay and places like that. When this was a new tool, if you bought a brand new one, it was like $5,000, but you can get one of these a lot cheaper now. There's used ones out there. People that bought them and didn't use them much they thought they would. But that's the one where you got the little sensor you lay up on the seat where it's vibrating, or on the dash or something like that. And if it's wiggling, you figure out what that frequency of the vibration is, at what speed it is, and all that. And then engine speed's got to be factored in, size of each pulley, the speed of each spinning component under the hood, alternator, whatever, crank exhaust, vibrations and all that. This can get pretty deep if you it all depends on if you want to go about it like an engineer, or if you just want to look and see if you can figure it out, which that's what we typically always did, but this is the ways you can do it. Ground connections are typically, a lot of times, if there's a ground connection that can carry a vibration, they don't use a stiff copper battery type cable. They use a braided strap. You've seen these braided straps. They do that because they don't translate vibrations. Like from the engine to the body back there at the back, you may find on some vehicles where it'll have a braided ground strap, where they're basically not, they want it to be grounded, but they don't want you to feel the vibration of the engine into the body of the car. That thick copper wire carries noise and vibration pretty bad. Now, if you've got a buzzing trim panel on the inside of the car, and you have to drive at a certain speed or whatever for it to buzz, that's annoying if you're doing it by yourself, or even if you got somebody with it. You got to hold that speed, there's traffic out there and all that kind of stuff. Well, you can take that this thing on your radio, on your phone rather, and you can pull this thing up. This is that app. See that? This is that app right here. And I'm going to show you something right here. Now, when I hit play, all right, this thing is, I got to get the volume turned up. Hear that? Now you can change it. See that? Well, what you do when you get that Bluetooth to your phone, when it's Bluetooth to your phone, you're going to have it going through the radio speakers. And whenever you're just sitting in your service bay and you dial that thing up to the frequency that resonates with this rattling dash or whatever, and then you can actually just, while it's buzzing, you can go and find your buzz without any problem at all, because you got your phone laying there playing through the speakers on the radio, you know. Now you'll have to be able to Bluetooth your phone to the radio and then tell the radio to forget your phone when you're through with a customer's car. But anyway, that's just one thing you can do. You could actually hook this up to a Bluetooth speaker, like you would if you were going to listen to music, and put that speaker in the car and do pretty much the same thing if that speaker's got a lot of good, you know, sound power and all that kind of stuff. That's all I'm going to give you this week. I got some more noise hunting stories and stuff next week. And I hope you got something out of this. We've been here about 21 minutes, and I hope you lasted to the end. And I'll see you guys next week. Appreciate you tuning in. Put some like, share it with your friends. See you later.